So I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Julie Duffy Dillon. Julie is an author, a dietitian. She's a podcaster. I asked her when she started her podcast, Find Your Food Voice, 2019. So a veteran, a pioneer. Woo-hoo. And in addition to all of that wonderful work that she's doing, she also offers a Substack and her new book, which I'm hoping we can get her to talk about. So I'm going to pass it over to you. Julie, could you please tell me why you wrote this book? And I'm very curious about why you named it Finding Your Food Voice. So tell me about who are you trying to reach? What's kind of the big message? And of course, help me understand why you picked the most awesome name, Finding Your Food Voice. I love it.
I wrote this book because after 25 years as a dietitian, I had been helping people with healthy eating, and I found early on, probably just like you did, that diets weren't working long-term for most people. And I kept noticing people blaming themselves. And there was so much of this like heavy burden that people were carrying along because they blamed themselves that diets weren't working. And I wish people could almost be like a fly on the wall whenever I was meeting with other folks, because everyone was saying the same thing. They had their own stories and their own kind of experiences, and yet they all felt so isolated. I think a lot of the work I do is because of that. I want to destigmatize this experience when food gets complicated by coming together and talking about it. As we know, that helps to really take away a lot of the power of shame. And in the book, I share the story of 5 different people that I hope for the listener helps them identify with some part of the experience when you have this kind of complicated history with food, and help you to define like what you want your relationship with food to look like, and how do you want to promote health, if at all. These are your decisions. And every chapter starts with a letter written to food. And you mentioned my podcast, and in 2016 is when I started it, and it was called Love Food. And at the beginning of every episode, I read a letter from a listener, and that was a part of the show. It was like, I read this Dear Food letter, and then at the episode, and I know you've been on an episode with me before, we go through it, and then at the end, we share some insight, and food writes back. And so I did the same thing with this book. But when I was early on in the podcast, I identify as someone who does a lot of intuitive eating work, but I also was finding that a lot of the clients that I worked with, they had this other kind of layer of complication with their relationship with food, whether it was insulin resistance or PCOS or prediabetes. Like there was this kind of chronic condition that they were struggling with. And so they thought that they just could not do intuitive eating. And so intuitive eating was like, they just didn't feel like it was enough for them. They needed some more. I almost picture like, I'm sure you've done a yoga class in your day at some point, like the blocks and the straps, like the props that we use, like they needed more props and straps to be able to access this non-diet space. And so I played around with different words to describe my work. And one of them was food peace. That's one I used to call like my kind of methodology and my framework for a really long time. But then, like the rest of the world, living through 2020 and the racial reckoning, and like really understanding my own role in systems of oppression, I'm like, I feel like that's when I really, like, in every cell of my body, started to understand, like, oh, not everyone's going to have a peaceful relationship with food. Like, not everyone's going to have access to peace until we're all liberated. Like, it's just not going to be the way for everyone. And I want to speak to more than just people who have access to food peace. And that's why the name evolved into Food Voice, because I know you asked about that too. But Finding Your Food Voice was after just lots and lots of brainstorming. And so much of what I noticed with clients is like they felt so isolated. Yet once people came together with other people and formed community, they brought their voices together, and each had their own definition of what they wanted to have with a relationship with food. But by coming together, they had more power, right? They could advocate for each other. And so it was like a coming together with a voice with food. So find your food voice, that just seemed to like sum it all up really well. And then food noise has come on the scene as this like phrase that a lot of people connect with. So I'm like, it kind of makes sense then too, to have that as part of the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so great. I like to talk about agency and autonomy. Agency, I'm bright and able. Autonomy, I have choice. And I feel like that finding your food voice is kind of really summarize both of those things. So when we recognize our body and our experience has wisdom to it, you know, you're turning around saying like, oh, I found this wisdom. And when you turn around, you say like, I have choice. No, I have choice. I'm going to tell you, this is my choice. And so
Mhm.
it just really feels like it's an alignment with that whole underlying
Mhm.
idea of agency and autonomy. And I think diet culture, how diet culture is set up is it's set up in a way that says, well, you don't know, and you know, you have to be told, and
Mhm.
you know, and you're not doing it right. And so again, you really see how agency is eroded. And so when we find our food voice, like in my mind, I'm imagining as like I find my wisdom and I can speak my truth, I can speak my wisdom. And I feel like that's just like, wow, what a great message to bring forward. So you told us a little bit about the book and how you're trying to kind of help people see themselves in this book. And I'm very curious about like who is the audience? Like paint me a picture. Tell me about
Mhm.
these people that you wrote about, because I feel like so many times when, and particularly in the no weight loss required space, you know, I'm really talking to people that want to prevent or manage diabetes. And I know you work a lot with people with PCOS. So kind of paint a picture of who would benefit from subscribing to your Substack, listening to your podcast, or purchasing your book, or going to one of your courses.
Mhm. I write for anyone who has this complicated history with food and is in a place that maybe we would call like diet rock bottom, but just really wanting to let go of the burden of their food decisions. Like we all have to make food decisions, hundreds every day. Yet for many folks, it's just such a heavy burden. And what I have the most experience with is PCOS and insulin resistance, having this kind of complicated condition where when a person's diagnosed, they're told, okay, now you have to manage your intake. You have to cut out certain things. You have to weigh a certain weight. That all changes what is recommended based on who you see, of course. And so I know for so many folks that I've worked with, they have felt so confused and there's no way they can stay connected, or they feel like they just can't stay connected to that innate wisdom that we were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, I wrote, or anything that I'm doing, it's to help people to remove those blocks, those heavy boulders that are blocking them from that innate wisdom. Because something I know about you and me, we don't have the insight for every human being on like what's the best way to eat. We just have that for ourselves, And so I see my role as kind of a guide, a historian. Let's help collect your data and help you then decide what's next for you. What's the next best step for you? And also really appreciating that we don't experience this relationship with food in a vacuum. We are living in a climate, a world where, like you mentioned, diet culture earlier, like we live in a world full of these oppressive systems that the diet industry is a part of. And the diet industry has this really wonderful kind of scheme where it's painted this picture of like, I'm going to help you be healthy and I'm the answer to everything. When in reality, it's like over promising, under delivering constantly. And so this book, I wanted to be basically this companion that not a get fix things real quick. I mean, I wish it was that, but it's just we don't have that. And so I see it as a companion for a person as they are taking each step along the way to figure out what they want to do with their relationship with food, and to again to let go of that burden, that shame that they feel. I mean, that's the if I could say anything that my book promises is it's designed to help you to let go of that shame and blame.
I'm imagining as you're talking, because you said a lot there. Um, as you're talking, I'm just trying to imagine like a relationship. And,
Mhm.
you know, if you think about like a friendship and you turn you're imagining like I'm like, oh, I really want to be Julie's friend and I really hope Julie likes me, but I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I can't trust myself around Julie. Like I don't have anything to offer. And that's almost kind of like what we're setting up here. diet culture is saying, oh, well, I can want to have a relationship with food, but you have to use diet culture in order to talk with Julie. Like, you have to use this third thing in order to have this relationship with food. And that, to me, kind of seeing it as the triad, I think is really interesting to me, because in all honesty, I've thought about it in so many different ways, but I hadn't really thought about how diet culture is kind of like the third wheel in a relationship. It's like this unwanted guest, who's just kind of like there, but not there in a neutral way, but kind of there like in an annoying way. Like, it's an uninvited, annoying guest that is totally eroding your self-esteem. It's totally eroding your confidence in your own ability.
Yeah, and it's been there so long that we don't see it anymore, right? And it's so close to us, we can't see it. And it has ulterior motives. It doesn't want us to be free and present. It wants us distracted.
And that's you reaching up to the larger part, which is really understanding that dieting by itself is an oppressive system, and that it's part of a larger oppressive system. And so I think a lot of my clients don't really understand when I say it's an oppressive system. They're like, no, Megan, I'm trying to be healthy. Like, why is this an oppressive system? And they're like, oh my gosh, intuitive eating, mindful eating, it's so confusing. Now you're bringing this element in.
Yeah.
But when I describe it, I say diets are the things that are telling you. They're telling you what to eat. They're telling you when to eat. They're telling you how much to eat. They're telling you who you are, what what your self-worth is. It's not supporting you. A weight inclusive approach is trying to support you. And when we find our food voice, we're getting that support to find our truth. We're getting that support that we need. It's not telling us what to do. It's supporting us in discovering what works for me in that kind of way. And I really feel like spending more time really understanding these larger frameworks, it helps my brain. Like, my brain is like, oh, I understand the framework. Now I can go forward with it.
Yes.
When people bog me down with lots of details, I'm like, oh, overwhelmed.
We are wired similarly. But I think like the heavy side of this, like the oppressive systems, and like, is it really necessary? I feel like that's something that I've been overthinking things my whole life. That's just right. I've been told that I've been doing that. But maybe that's not where everyone's going to start. But I think it's really important for a person to really look at their own data. Like I was mentioning earlier, like, let's go through, like, how many times have you actually tried dieting? Like, how many times have you tried to cut out carbs to manage your blood sugar? How many times have you done intermittent fasting? Like, let's like lay it all out on the table and put it on the timeline of your life. Let's come up with a number. Was it 67, 42? Like, how many do we have here? And then what if you put it on the timeline of your life, you can probably then, I know many of my clients could say like, oh, I dieted there because my partner dumped me and I thought I was too big, or I thought that now that my blood sugar is too high, I'm going to be too much of a burden for my family, so I decided that I was going to cut out things. Like, there's certain reasoning that people often will pick a diet, and then when you can like lay out all of that, you see that they're part of those oppressive systems. And I have this map of a diet trap in my book, and it's this roundabout. Like, if you're, I don't know, I always think about the National Lampoon's European Vacation, where he's like, look, go kids, it's Big Ben. That's a very Gen X reference. But, anyway, that's what I was picturing, making this roundabout. And like, there's like this like hopefulness with every diet. Like, we feel like this like hopeful, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to finally have this solution so I don't have diabetes anymore, right? Or I'm going to have this solution so I can fit into a bathing suit, or I can just go to the doctor and be seen and not shamed. Whatever like the outcome is hoping to be, these are like these sparks, but there's something that's like right before that, and those are the oppressive systems pushing you into the diet trap. And then when you try to get out, they pushed it right back in. And so whenever I would help clients, and when I talk about in my book, like mapping out all the diets you've been on, what I'm hoping it can do, once you like have the number, like whatever that number is, even if it's just one, that you can like let your like head gently look in the other direction and consider like, okay, maybe I can figure out a different way besides just this diet thing. And maybe it is these oppressive systems that are pushing me into this. And it's so like so hard. Like it's such a big ask. And that's why it's messy. But you know, that's just it is. That's what it is. Without relying on oppressive systems, it's gonna be messy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. As you were talking, I had a flash of Marie Kondo. And for those that have never seen Marie Kondo, one of the things she likes to do is she says, take all your clothes out of the closet, put them on the bed, or put them out, and touch each one and say, did it spark joy? And I'm just thinking, touch each diet that you've been on and say, did it spark joy? And you're like, no.
It maybe started with it, right? It started with some joy sparks, but no, it never died. If the spark would have come through, then you wouldn't be like in this constant loop, right?
Right, right. In No Weight Loss Required, I wrote a roadmap, and the first step of the roadmap is really looking at the math of diet culture and talking about how it's always subtraction. It's always negative.
Yeah.
And literally, the math is negative. It's I'm not enough, I need to stop eating, I can't eat, I'm not allowed. And we just hear this negative. And again, that's that loop. We're in this loop of I'm not enough. I can't eat. I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed pleasure. I'm not allowed joy. I'm not allowed autonomy. I'm not allowed. And you could just really hear, and to me, that is the antithesis of an oppressive system, is that in order for me to do something, I need to get permission from outside of myself. So again, just another rejoice in finding my food voice is just that's you reclaiming that agency. No, it's my voice. It's not Bob's. And for those who don't know, Bob is my fictitious person that I pick on in all of my sessions.
Poor Bob.
We have a lot of empathy for Bob, but Bob's a little annoying. I just want to let you know. It's not my favorite guy. So again, as we start looking at what are little steps that we can do? What are little things? And I have found kind of being in this space of having a medical diagnosis, having a reason by which we might go back into that roundabout of diet. I am feeling alone because that's actually one of the other things that diet culture does. We engage in this so we can belong, but dieting actually makes us feel alone and isolated. And so it's the weirdest thing. It's like, oh, I'll join this diet and I'll be part of this group and I'll, it'll be great and I'll belong. And then you're on the diet and you feel isolated and alone and empty. And it's like, then I feel empty. So then I want to go eat because it makes sense. If I'm empty and I eat, I won't be empty anymore. And so we're, again, back into that little roundabout, that little loop again. We're back in that. And so you had talked about how when we have this diagnosis, this tug, it is like, how do I navigate it? What are some ideas outside of community? What are some other ideas that somebody might turn around and say, like, I didn't think of that. That's great.
Yeah. I think the thing I think about next for anyone in that space that maybe is getting a diagnosis is the fear of what if I don't diet? Because when they have it in the past, they may have experienced binge eating or when they were feeling alone, feeling like the pull to emotionally eat. And a big part of finding your food voice is connecting with the compassion of how our relationship with food has also helped us in many different ways besides just fueling, and how that is a really normal, healthy part of being a human being. And part of what the diet industry really messes with that it really makes me angry is that somehow has convinced us that when we eat for emotions or when we're recovering from not eating enough because of dieting or poverty or whatever reason, and we can't stop eating, that makes us bad. And again, I'm like, we need to like figure out a way to peel off this like shame and blame, because emotional eating is a really normal part of being a human being. It's always existed and it always will. And so if that's a fear of not dieting is like, oh God, now I'm gonna like really just have a hard time stopping. I think it's really important to name that like food is a necessary part of survival, like just like our breathing. And I talk a lot in the book about like I kind of try to be silly with it. Like I remember being a new mom. I have 2 kids and they're teenagers now, but when they were newborns, and of course I was sleep deprived, all I thought about was sleep. And I was so cranky. Even years later, when I was sleeping better, I was still really worried about my sleep. Like, and I would talk about it all the time. And it wasn't that I was addicted to sleep. It was I was sleep deprived. But then also, if someone's like drowning in a big lake and someone saves them, they're not going to just breathe normally. They're going to be gasping for air. They may even need to be intubated. There's probably some trauma with that. And so when we experience emotional eating, there's going to be like our figurative gasping for air too. So if you find yourself in a place like that and like, oh, what's going to happen to my blood sugar? You know, uh, I can like feel the anxiety with that. Like, oh no, what's going to happen? But recovering and repairing your relationship with food is something that I know you and I know, like that is something that's so great for your blood sugar and your insulin levels and all the parts of you to to find peace and also promote health. So so I think that emotional kind of connection to food gets really complicated too for a lot of folks with blood sugar stuff because as we've talked about earlier, working with a lot of people with PCOS and insulin resistance, many people with PCOS end up having diabetes too. And something that's a really common experience with insulin resistance, of course, is like these intense carb cravings and feeling like just so ashamed when people would describe like I felt so horrible that I just can't stop eating. But it's this primal craving for a reason. It's the body needs help with using food for energy, and there's interventions. Dieting is the one that's just given out all the time, but we have lots and lots of things we can add, like using your math. We have lots of things we can add. And so that's what I would encourage people to lean on. And like you were saying before, is instead of what could you take away to make it negative, what can you add to it instead? And especially with PCOS, what I feel like it was such a game changer for me as a clinician once I started to see it with clients, how we could just add things. Like you didn't even need to remove carbs and sugar. Like it just wasn't even like a thing you needed to do. And every once in a while, someone would be like, yeah, I kind of feel sluggish when I have this food that has carbs or sugar in it. And I'm like, oh, that's some cool insight. And so that they just knew. And so if they ate it, they knew they would probably feel kind of sluggish afterwards. And so they just had it when they wanted to, and not every single day or whatever they decided. Right. So yeah, like you may be able to come to that kind of conclusion. You may have some like tiny little granular thing that you find causes some quirks, but like other than that, yeah, what can we add instead, and then help you figure out what you need. So I know it's a really long-winded answer, so we can make sense of it or not, but yeah, that's where I'm going with the next kind of steps.
Beautiful. You said a lot, so I want to kind of
Yeah.
back up. You talked about compassion, so I'll put a link in the show notes, but I had some other guests on that talked about compassion, particularly around diabetes and when should we be reaching for compassion? And I think that that's really an essential part, is that the not knowing, the grace. We don't know what our body needs if we've never asked. We don't know if we've never looked, so there's you're not, no one's born knowing. And so we get to learn. And like you said, in this next step, it can be a little messy. And if we're afraid of learning because we have to get it right, that is it's a lot of expectation. I can't get a wrong answer, and you can just feel the expectation just go up and up and up. And you said you had kids and this. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, Mom, what if I? And it's like, you'll figure it out. You will. We'll get through it because, that's what we do. It may be ugly. It may be bumpy. You may have a few bruises, a couple of life lessons, or it's just going to be awesome. And you're, worried about something that you wound up, doing really well at. But we don't know.
We don't know.
And I feel like that's one of the things diet culture, that's a false belief that we do know. And I feel
that's
like
the answer. They think that's the answer, right? But it's this false reality. Yeah.
Right. And it's a false belief that
Mhm.
I know. I don't
Mhm.
know. Like I'm learning all the time. And
Mhm.
there's this false belief that like somebody knows how many calories I need. Somebody knows what I'm supposed to eat. Somebody knows, what's going on in my body. And I'm like, guesses. And so again, when we turn around and say, like Julie doesn't know, Meager doesn't know, I'm going to learn. Again, you can hear that agency come back in. So I really appreciate you did that. And I really appreciate how you tied that to compassion. It takes a lot of compassion to
Mhm.
turn around and say, I don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah, that doesn't make you broken. You're just like surviving in this whole firestorm world, you know? Um, yeah, we're all you're doing it. You're doing what you need to do. And yeah, there's nothing broken about you.
Right. And that is, I think just saying that there's nothing broken about you, again in the roadmap, that's the third step is that diet culture does promote this false narrative that people are broken. And I always like
Mhm.
to say people are never broken. Things are
Mhm.
broken, people are not broken.
Mhm.
And, we fix things, we don't fix people. People heal. And so
Mhm.
again, it's just really getting it really clear that whenever you're like I'm broken or this, like I did it wrong, all of that is part of this false belief. Those are words that we apply to objects. We don't apply them to humans they have feelings and they have lots of different pressures on them. They're not
Mhm.
stationary, static objects, and we can't look at them in that way. So again,
Mhm.
thank you so much for just really highlighting this false belief that diet culture, perpetuates about being broken. Kind of coming back to what you said again, you really talked, I think, beautifully about the learning piece and how we need to learn. And when we talk about having a condition like PCOS or insulin resistance, you didn't mention it explicitly, so that's why I'm coming back, is we need to learn about nutrition without diet culture.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that looks very different than learning about nutrition through the lens or from diet culture.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so if you could just speak a little bit about what makes nutrition different when we're not looking at it from diet culture, like what is the difference? How is that different?
Oh, I think it's so different. It's I going into like a dream sequence of like, what would life be like if like that's the only way we knew food was just part just fuel and part just connecting with other people. And yeah, it's pleasure and and also utilitarian. Like it just is like so many different facets to it, right? And part of finding your food voice is trying to reconnect you to those things. And that's part of like I know for me and my family history, I have a really Polish, I have a very strong Polish side of my family. And every funeral and wedding I've been to, whether I'm hungry or not, I mean, I'm eating all those Polish foods and I never get to have because I live in the South where I don't have many people making those for me. And I have a feeling anyone listening, there's certain foods that you are brought up around that give you that warm fuzzy or that are super grounding or even just routine. It's just part of a routine. There's something about food for me that also is like that there's just I think about like seasonally. I have this thing with arugula. I love it. Once it starts getting warm out, I'm like, I cannot get enough arugula. Just give me all the arugula everywhere. I'll put it in any kind of food. But then once it starts to get cold again, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want that anymore.
Yeah, rephrasing what you said so it is that very simple answer. Diet culture makes food kind of singular, and you're saying it's
Mhm.
so much more complex. It's
Yeah.
like somebody turning around and saying, if food was a crayon, here's one color, you can only
Oh,
choose one
yes.
color, and you miss out on all those other colors. So I love
Yes.
that. And, you
Yes.
know, I describe, this as it's a pie chart. There's lots of
Mhm.
percents. And sometimes we're choosing food because it connects us to mom or it
Mhm.
reminds us of that time after it rained. And sometimes we connect with and we choose food because it's available. And sometimes we have an upset stomach and it's like the only thing that we can imagine eating. So there's lots
Mhm.
of reasons why we choose what we choose. And I really appreciate you saying you're allowed to have lots of reasons. So much
Mhm.
permission in your answer of we're allowed to see food in the complexity that it is, see food
Mm-hmm.
in the eating. And again, you subtly wove into this idea of connection, which kind of brings us back to this idea of community. So can you just share a little bit more about your community and how you're trying to connect people and how people can find you, and just give us a nice way so we can get more of your juju in our lives.
The word juju is a warm fuzzy for me because that's what my nieces and nephews would always call me, as Aunt Juju. Um, so basically, my like universe of like the stuff that I'm working on right now, my book, my podcast, my membership, it's all focused on tools to help you find a way out of the pressure to diet, and then building together. I call the community like voice finders, like building together with other voice finders ways out of these oppressive systems so we can all get out. And in particular, if you have PCOS, I have a PCOS Power membership where all the tools that I would teach my clients one-on-one, I have it all in there for you so you can go through it on your own time, but also there's a way to connect with me and connect with people in the community. Yeah. So the thing that I am always hoping is that you can come back to that place with food where food is that vehicle for you to be able to get the support you need. And one of my favorite words that I just learned in the last probably a year and a half is sober mesa. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but my since I saw you last, I got divorced, and so my boyfriend, he's from Mexico, and one of our favorite things, like when we started dating, is like having a meal, and then just the meal would go on for a long time because we were just talk. We come from different places and have different interests, but like, I mean, our conversations just go. And I'm like, this is so great. I love this. He's like, oh, this is the sobremesa. This is where you, after a meal, you sit and talk for hours and hours. He's like, this is my favorite part that like my family would do. And like, I was like, yeah, we all need that, like that connection and way of connecting with other people. So if I could borrow from another culture this kind of way of connecting with food, that's what I'm always hoping that people feel when they're either like reading my book or listening to my podcast, is a way to like keep community and connection as we're talking about food.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much.